Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Hi, this is Jed Hall, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm an academic development consultant at the University of Leeds. You're joining us in Season 5 of our Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where we're diving into the effects of research impact on research culture and focusing in on different topics to ensure those effects are positive. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. Faith Welch and Jaylene Wehipeihana. Faith is the inaugural Research Impact Manager at the University of Auckland, and Jaylene is the inaugural Research Manager Vision Mātauranga, and she will be joining us later. Faith joined Auckland just over 6 years ago, and prior to that, she worked at the University of Bristol in an impact role supporting academics in the science and engineering faculties. After her PhD in parasitology, she worked for the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, or BBSRC, in innovation and business engagement for 3 years before joining Bristol. Faith, welcome.
Kia ora.
Oh, that's lovely. What does that mean?
Kia ora means hello, welcome.
Faith, I'm a bit of a sports fanatic, so before we get into talking about impact, you do a sport, roller derby, I'd never heard of before you mentioned it. So I decided to look it up on YouTube. And to be honest, it looks brutal. So before we get into the impact discussion, tell me a bit more about it.
Yeah, so I used to roller skate quite a lot as a child. As an adult, I was out roller skating with a friend around the Bristol harbour side. Hadn't put a pair of roller skates on for about 15 years, and someone came up to me and said, "Have you ever heard of roller derby?" And I hadn't, and then I watched a movie about it, and then somehow I ended up going to a roller derby training practice. I ended up playing for Bristol. We ended up traveling across Europe playing roller derby, played in Ireland, played in Germany, Denmark, and then when I moved to New Zealand, I ended up playing for Auckland, and it turns out that playing roller derby in New Zealand is much more exciting than in the UK, because I got to play tournaments in Hawaii and Australia. We won our tournament in Hawaii, and yeah, it's a full contact sport on roller skates, involving one person skating as fast as they possibly can around an oval shaped track, and the other players on the opposite team trying to stop that person from lapping them, essentially. Yeah, it's fast paced, really great fun, amazing to play. Unfortunately, I've just had my second child, and I think I might have just about retired.
Brilliant. I guess we'd better try and take some of that adrenaline into the into a discussion about impact then, and see if we can keep it going. Which is a full contact sport, isn't it? Impact, interestingly.
Yeah. Team sport.
Yeah. So now that you're in New Zealand and your experience in the UK, I wonder if you could tell us about any commonalities or differences between how impact affects the research culture in those two HE sectors.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I started my kind of impact career in the UK. When I was at the BBSRC, I did look after or support some of our funds that were kind of impact related. But it felt very much like impact in the UK was predominantly driven by the ref. And I won't say entirely at all, because there are many, many fantastic researchers who are driven by wanting to make change. Impact has always been around, but that real acceleration in impact in the UK was ref driven. And I think most people would say that. But when I started at the University of Bristol, it was really exciting because my role was brand new. It was one of the first impact roles that was solely focused on increasing the impact from the research within the university, and not to serve the ref. So we were always making it quite clear to our researchers that we weren't there just to be creating impact case studies. We were actually there to support their research to make a difference. So it did feel like to me it was kind of an assessment-driven culture that was kind of having to catch up with itself, and it realised that it had used up all its impact case studies for 2014, and actually maybe they needed to start kind of resourcing impact for the future. So that's kind of my UK experience, and I actually moved to New Zealand sadly only a year after I joined the University of Bristol. I will say I did my undergrad and my PhD at the University of Bristol, so it was fantastic to go back and work there in the future. But I moved to New Zealand in 2016, and when I went there, I was told that impact was coming to New Zealand. And that's kind of what got me a job at the University of Auckland, although I didn't actually start in my current role. I just started working in the research office, and they kind of allowed me to explore impact within the university, to teach people about what research impact was, kind of on the side of my role when I first started there. But when I kind of started to learn more about the impact culture and the New Zealand research ecosystem, it was really clear that impact was already there. So this is 2016, I should say. Impact was already there. Funders were just starting to kind of bring it into assessment and grant applications. I think the Health Research Council was one of the first that really started thinking, okay, how do we assess that pathway to impact? There wasn't a national assessment of impact like in the REF. We had lots of researchers creating impact because they wanted to make a difference. But really interestingly is that our Māori and Pacific researchers were having huge impacts within the communities because that's just how they do research. So they co-design, they co-create knowledge, they utilise their Indigenous knowledge, and the main parts of their research is about giving back to their communities. So that's just how they do research. So I remember just talking to some Māori and Pacific researchers, and they just said, this is, impact is what we've always been doing. It's just we've never been referring to it in that way. So I think that was one of the most interesting things. My role as an impact specialist was one of the first in New Zealand, or was the first, I should say, in New Zealand, actually. There's now a really small handful of us. I suspect there'll be more of us soon.
So, Faith, maybe I can dig a little deeper into that. I mean, impact's always been around in every higher education sector, or else we wouldn't have innovations anywhere, would we? Mm. But can you pick me out a little bit more in terms of what maybe that REF-driven acceleration compared to what's happening now in New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. So I think in New Zealand, impact's kind of been driven by culture and by individuals. So as I described, our kind of Indigenous researchers, it's just how they do their research. You tend to find that lots of our small research institutes, of which there are many, they have their own impact agendas, and they've slowly been building this up at scale. So I would say that in the UK, the REF really accelerated impact to the forefront of all researchers' minds. It's been a slower process in New Zealand, but it's been quite grassroots, and so there's quite a lot more acceptance. I think there will be an acceleration soon, as there looks like there'll be changes to our PBRF, which is the New Zealand version of the UK's REF. So it's how we assess the excellence of our research here in New Zealand. It looks like in the next one there will be some kind of impact assessment. And I think that's going to bring some really, really big changes to impact within New Zealand.
So for those of us that don't know what PBRF stands for, what is it then?
PBRF is the Performance-Based Research Fund. I hope I've got that right. Yeah, it's essentially the money that's given from the Tertiary Education Commission.
So just moving on to another question, I was really interested in what you said about that, grassroots aspect, because I noticed, your work was highly commended by the Emerald Impact Awards in 2021. And in reading your case study, you mentioned that COVID had generated a pause in the government's top-down introduction of impact, and that gave you opportunities to do things from the ground up. So can you give us a bit more insight into that grassroots and bringing impact forward from that kind of coalface experience?
Sure. And I think all kudos can be placed on the shoulders of our researchers here, because they did some amazing things throughout COVID. I think COVID put a lot of weight on our Indigenous researchers' shoulders to make sure that any policies that were coming from government weren't increasing inequities within their communities. So they were doing amazing, fantastic research that was funded at very short notice by our research funders. Amazing communications, really targeted science communications to the communities that really needed it. Outreach to ensure that people understood why they should be getting vaccinated. Communities who quite rightly didn't trust the government and so needed to hear from their own people as to why they should get vaccinated. So there was incredible impact going on throughout here, and it's because the government said, right, we just need to put the money into the hands of the researchers who can make change happen and quickly. I think something really exciting as well that happened was, and I don't think you get this in many other countries in the world, New Zealand's really small. Everybody knows each other. They talk about there's 2 degrees of separation. So you're always only 2 steps away from Jacinda. Mine is when I interviewed for my current role, I was interviewed by the now Chief Science Advisor to Jacinda Ardern. So that's my 2 degrees of separation, Jacinda. But it's just incredible because we literally had our researchers just calling the Director General of Health and saying, this policy isn't correct, we need to change it, or we need to go into lockdown in 10 days' time. We had some researchers at the University of Auckland who were advising on the modelling that was showing when we needed to go into lockdown, how long for, what the spread of disease was going to look like. And a lot of trust and support was put into our researchers to do that. So
yeah, that sounds really amazing. It's a real collaboration there.
Yeah, there's a lot of I think there's a lot of trust between the government and the research ecosystem within New Zealand. I think COVID highlighted that. I think it highlighted to the public the importance of funding research. I hope as well that it highlighted that by reducing bureaucracy, you can increase the speed of impact, which is really exciting to see. And also, I think it really highlighted the importance of really clear and effective science communication, or I should say research communication. I don't like saying science communication because I think it ignores a large part of our research community. But it highlighted the importance of that and the difference you can make by clearly and unpatronizingly communicating the latest research to the public.
I think that's a really great point. You mentioned on a number of occasions your Indigenous researchers, and I know you don't want to speak on their behalf because that would be wrong. But since you've been in New Zealand, how's your conception of co-production changed as a result of kind of observing how they do it?
Well, actually, I had a thought about this question, and I thought that I'm not the best person to ask to answer it. So I've actually invited my friend Jaylene Wehipeihana. She's the University of Auckland's Research Manager Vision Mātauranga. Hi, Jaylene.
Kia ora.
Hi, Jaylene.
Kia ora, Jed. Just before I answered, I've just got to do a little acknowledgement. So, kei te mihi kia kōrua, I tēnei wā, ka kōrero, ka haramai au ki te kōrero I tēnei kaupapa, kei te mihi kia koe Faith, me koe hoki Jed. So, I was just saying, very much in my language and Māori is just acknowledging and thanking both of you for inviting me to talk on this topic tonight. And I'm just really excited about that. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jaylene, and thanks for giving up some of your evening. It's early morning for me, but fairly late into the evening for you. So I wonder if you could give our listeners an overview of your role and Faith mentioned Vision Mātauranga. So could you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So I hold an inaugural role at the University of Auckland as Research Manager Vision Mātauranga. It's in response to a government policy that has come out of New Zealand government. So a little bit of history around why this policy exists is due to the Tiriti or the Treaty of Waitangi that exists within New Zealand, which is an agreement between the Crown and tangata whenua or Māori here when Cook and them came over, Hobson I think it is, sorry, one of them, when they came over and joined us way back then, there was a treaty signed around obligations around what the Crown was responsible for and also what understood to be what Māori were responsible for. So that's an agreement that forms. The treaty has influenced, and because we're partners, we seem to be partners with the Crown Māori, this policy, Vision Mātauranga, came into existence. I think it's been around for about close to 20 years now. So in terms of things, I think it's still a very new policy. It's very broad, but it's what we would say it's probably focus or kaupapa of this policy is around engaging with Māori in particular. It is a policy that is focused on Māori or tangata whenua of Aotearoa. So it's engaging with Māori to connect and be part of the research system in whatever shape and form that is. So we as Māori have a knowledge system, and we have a science system in our own beliefs and our own thinking, and it's about bringing those two worlds together, but not necessarily working interweave together. I don't know whether that's the right word, but working together like that. It both systems have their standalone, but it's about enabling Māori to engage in the research sector and do that. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I guess we could really go into loads of detail just on what the philosophies and things like that around that and what the different knowledge systems are. But I thought we might go practical rather than philosophical. So if I was coming to New Zealand as a younger man that unfortunately I am, as a researcher with some experience of co-production. So for instance, I grew up on a council estate in the UK. So if I had experience of working with those sorts of communities and researching with them, but I came to New Zealand for a new job, what would you tell me that would be kind of maybe different that I'd need to build into my co-production practices?
It's what you'd probably need to think about if you're a new coming into Aotearoa and undertaking that kind of research, or just undertaking research, full stop. It's understanding what a Māori worldview is and actually acknowledging and recognising that it's not just one way that the world is viewed. It's not just through one set of eyes. It's not through the most dominant set of eyes, which is European or Pākehā, which as we refer to them in New Zealand, but that there is an alternative way to look at, the glass half full, half empty sort of situation around that. So it's been open. My advice would be that you'd need to be open to challenging your approaches and challenging your thinking, and being okay with that, being okay that what you think and what you see and what you say may not actually be the way. In particular, understanding how Māori exist, I think is a key thing. Understanding that it's not the nucleus of a family of mum, dad, and the kids. It's actually broader. You've got, a Māori immediate family can consist of about 25 people. That's aunties, uncles, cousins, and everything around that. So it's actually understanding that when you talk to Māori, you're not just talking to one person, and it's not just their sole view. It's actually a collective view, and just so I think that's probably a key if you're coming in to do that engagement, do that co-production, or work with a community such as that. It's actually understanding where they come from and let them lead you.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. It's interesting you said that about the family, because I have Irish heritage, so I have quite a lot of cousins. So I was kind of thinking, oh my God, I'd have to be associated with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of just, I might come back with kind of further questions as that new researcher. So what does that showing of respect really entail? So if I'm meeting a Maori family for the first time, how might that pan out? What would I need to do?
So it can be just as basic as just taking your shoes off at the door. It's understanding their what we would refer to as tikanga, which is like their processes, not necessarily their what is probably the English version, which is rules, but just understanding how they operate. So taking off your shoes when you go into someone's house, a little thing such as if you're offered food, even though you've just had a big lunch, it's rude to not engage with that food, because for us having that opportunity to sit at a table and share food, you're actually going through, and this is, we could go down the rabbit hole around this and everything like that, but it is around sharing those values, making sure that you're coming in as a friend and not an enemy, not a foe, not someone that's coming in to just pillage us, I suppose is a word, so it's just been acknowledging that, but also acknowledging that, and I don't think this is just for Aotearoa, but I think across the world around Indigenous peoples, how the doing research or research is a very dirty word, because we've had people just come in and take and remove us. So we're quite guarded around who we bring into that space. So it's being able to humble yourself and go, yes, you could be some professor or associate professor or something like that, but when you come through that door, you are just you, and we're not necessarily looking at you, we're looking at who else is around you, who supports you, who works with you around that sort of stuff. So it's just the ability to be humble and actually understand who you're engaging with and how they operate. So being on that other side and doing a little bit of thinking around, well, how do they welcome us, how do they do that sort of stuff.
Yeah So it is about that trust building and just making sure that you don't do anything completely unconsciously that would destroy that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about trust. I mean, once you're in with and in's probably not the right word, but once you've built that trust and you've got that foundation and everyone's seen, everyone's benefiting, there's that reciprocity occurring through that process, that actually you then become part of the family. You become part of that, and you will most European thinking ways is that when a research project exists for 3 years or however long the funding is available for, but when you engage with Indigenous communities and stuff like that, if you've had, it could just last for 3 years, but if you've built that trust and worked on that and created that reciprocity, it could go forever. And you'll never get out. You'll be invited to every family thing. You'll be invited all over the place. So it is definitely, Jed, about building that trust. That trust is, if you can build that, you'll be fine.
Brilliant.
Jed, could I jump in there and ask Jaylene a question?
Of course you can, Faith. Go ahead.
I think your listeners might be, I don't know, quite, because it's something that I hadn't quite thought of previously. And we always ask our researchers to not only think about what the impacts of their research are going to be, but also consider what the negative impacts may be, and so that they can mitigate them against them. And Jaylene, I don't know if you've got any comments, because it was something that I think I'm a lot more comfortable with now, is actually considering how our research and ensuring our research doesn't increase inequities in our Indigenous communities. I don't know if you've got any comments about that. It's always a challenge, because dealing with Indigenous communities, or First Nations communities, is always, it takes a lot longer. We say that, and it takes a lot longer because of the historical trauma or the history that's occurred with research, because people come in, we think it's a really good thing, and they just absolutely take the information and flip it and make us look a little bit negative in those lights. So that engagement with Indigenous communities does take longer, and probably takes double the time you would with European, because European have good outcomes with research, and they have no history or bad history around it. So there's no trauma for European or white people to have that engagement with research. But it is about putting in the effort to do that engagement and build that trust with Indigenous communities, because what tends to happen is everyone has a great idea. They get their cohorts and everything like that, and they're just going to go ahead, and then they think, oh, this is also an issue for Indigenous communities, we need to work with them. But what you're doing is you're actually progressing, because you've done the legwork, you've explained the situation, you've got this, it's not a good word, but the white cohort, or the European cohort involved, and they're off doing their thing. And now you've got to explain it to the Indigenous people, and build that trust, get them on board in the research and stuff like that. And you're creating a gap. So there already existed an inequity. It's very prominent in health. The health inequities for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people is huge. But when you're doing that planning and engaging, it's around, you need to get your Indigenous community on board earlier and work with them before you go to the easy group, because it's about bringing them on, because as you work your project through, one group's going to be always ahead, because you need to build, because those Indigenous communities need to have that trust built first. And once they're on board, you'll be away laughing. But it is difficult, and we are mindful around, it is easier to get one group, and if you are a non-Indigenous person, it's harder, but that's also just a perception around harder. I've always sort of thought around, if you were to rock up to in New Zealand, we have fish and pike. So if you were going over there to say you've got a really great idea to sell some medical technology or something like that, you do your research around them, you'll find out what they're funding, you'll find out what they're doing. You wouldn't just rock up in, shorts and t-shirt, you'll get all dressed up, and you'd have your pitch and your plan. So why is it harder to do exactly that for Indigenous communities? They're no different. They're just another group that you need to engage with through your research project. So why don't you do your research on them? Why don't you find out what's their issues and how you can help around that? Because I don't understand that. Well, I can't engage with an Indigenous community because I'm non-Indigenous. It's like, well, how can you engage with Fisher and Paykel? And you're not you're not Fisher and Paykel.
Yeah, you're not Fisher and Paykel, and you're not, you're just a researcher, and you think you've got this good thing for them. But so it's around actually demystifying that understanding. And there is work that non-Indigenous researchers need to do, and I acknowledge that, but it shouldn't stop them from engaging.
So I'm just really interested. We've been talking about how things are currently in New Zealand in comparison to the UK. But where do you think things will go next for the University of Auckland and the wider sector in New Zealand in developing its research impact culture?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the changes to the PBRF are going to make a big difference. Now, at the time of recording, we still don't quite know what the changes are going to be. Research impact is going to be introduced. I really hope that the powers that be have listened to significant feedback that people have been giving. We really don't want it to be the huge administrative burden that it is in the UK. A country as small as New Zealand cannot afford to take resources away from developing impact and putting it into creating stories about it. And I really hope that we don't go down that route. I think more positive things that are really coming. I think the PBRF change is a positive thing, but I just have my hesitations about it. But really positive things that are happening is that MB, who are the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment in New Zealand, they fund the science and innovation system. They're in the process of doing a huge revamp of the whole research funding system. And it's been a really open and collaborative process. I think it's been a really positive thing. And there's potentially some really exciting change coming. I really hope that more support for impact comes from it. I've been told not to completely hold my breath. We might have to wait a little bit longer. But I've seen huge amounts of change over the last few years. Personally, I've really been focusing my efforts on connecting up impact specialists across New Zealand, Australasia, sharing best practice, and kind of doing a bit of a grassroots, well, if the government can't give us funds to make change happen, how can we do it, and how can we keep pushing and prodding them? And it's been working. What I would really, really like if they could give me a impact Christmas present, I think the UK's impact acceleration accounts are fantastic. And that's what I've asked the Chief Science Advisor for MB, if we could have those, please.
That's we could go on all morning for me and all night for you. It's been fascinating to listen to how impact is affecting the research culture in New Zealand and how that interacts with other policies, like fully respecting and including Indigenous communities in the research practice out there. Yeah, we could go on all, as I said, all morning or all night, but I know you two both need to either go off and enjoy the rest of your shorter evening, and so I'll thank you both for joining us today and illuminating our listeners about this topic. So thanks, Jaylene, and thanks, Faith.
Thanks, Jed.
Thank you, Jed.
And now I'm going to hand over to Faith to give us a Maori goodbye, I believe. Faith.
I just thought it would be kind of appropriate to close with a closing karakia. Karakia means kind of prayer. And in all our meetings, we will open with one and we close with one as well. So here we go. 6 years, and my pronunciation isn't amazing, but we put a lot of effort into trying to learn Te Reo Māori. So tēnā anō tātou, tēnā o ka mihi atu, mō te pai o te tātou noho tahi, me te atohua o ngā kōrero. Nō reira e aku rangatira, hoki pai atu ki o koutou tari, ki o koutou kainga, ki o koutou whānau, ka te rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.